Are you the one that said to me, if what comes of Donald Trump's election is people's awareness
Bullshit.
of bullshit,
Yeah.
then this is 100% worth
Absolutely.
whatever. Right.
If people become aware of the bullshit in the media and false news and fake news and misleading news and news that truncates really complex things into sound bites that aren't true when you share them, I would have voted for Donald Trump if that was what was going to come.
They don't know what I know.
Welcome back to another Zengineering podcast. I'm Adam.
Brian,
So
round 3. Da-ding.
round 3. Yeah, this is a hard one to do.
For sure, this is like our hardest topic.
I'm not gonna pretend like I need to introduce when this is happening and what the context is. You're probably in the United States if you're listening to us. You know what's going on. Here's my challenge for you. Tell me something good about Donald Trump.
Tell me something good about Hillary Clinton. Are you proposing that to me specifically or our listeners?
Yes, no, I was proposing that to you.
Great, I'll tell you something, because I wrote this on my sister's Facebook stream because I've been trying to have a very positive conversation with her. I am excited that Donald Trump is primarily a business person and an entrepreneur and not a lifetime politician. You can argue a lot of different perspectives on that comment, but the general idea that he has been doing other things and he has been working for economic benefit for a business, I think is a great perspective to apply to his role as CEO of the U.S. federal government. I'm excited for that perspective. I'm glad it's not a lawyer who's a politician for their full-time job because it will do something new.
And so you mentioned the post on your sister's Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
So I think talk to me a little bit about the approach that I have greatly admired the approach that you have taken throughout the election season in your effort to engage in political discourse, mostly via Facebook. Explain your methodology, your approach.
Well, I
think it's good for the world, and everyone should be this way.
I don't usually post at all on Facebook, really. I post pictures sometimes. I very rarely post articles. I only do when I think it's really, really of value. And so I spent a week writing a post about voting for Hillary Clinton. Just off and on. It was a text file that opened on my computer that I would play with every once in a while. And I was it was more of a process for myself than anyone else, trying to figure out how do I want to present how I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, knowing all of the complexities. And I ended up coming to the conclusion that what I wanted to share was just a positive view of a decision that I was about to make. And so I wanted to say both what I was feeling and what I was thinking. I wanted it to stay entirely positive. I wanted to discuss my candidate and my vote, and I did not want to say anything negative about the other candidate or other people's votes. And so I wrote a post that just clearly stated that I was voting for Hillary Clinton, and this is the conclusion I've come to. And I even kind of stayed away from reasons. I mean, I listed stuff, but I didn't list like a bunch of facts. I didn't list a bunch of like policies. I tried to kind of keep it neutral and more just make it here's my feeling, and this is what I'm making my decision on, because that was kind of the conclusion I was forced into, is I have to make this decision based on a feeling because I quite simply can't just make it based on facts.
And I think the way you articulate that is relevant to the conversation we keep having around this. Like what you end up sharing is a feeling, but it's regarding a decision in this sort of like binary system, but where each decision has the weight of many different complex things behind it. And no one is equipped enough to possibly understand the complexity of those decisions. Like every president starts looking young and ends the job looking old.
Like a fucking zombie
years.
is eating their legs.
I can't possibly. I've always maintained that when you go in and you start to learn the things that the president knows about the state of things, you either learn it's a big job, but everything's pretty well covered. Here's all the things you don't know as a civilian. or you realize it's way worse than we ever possibly could have imagined. Everything is living on a thread. We're almost about to kill everyone always. Like, just, and you can't possibly, like, either way, the job is superhuman. No one is fit to be president and chief operator of an entity this large.
That's a fair comment.
Right?
That's a very fair comment. So no one is equipped for this job.
And so to try to process what it means to be equipped for that job, no one can really give you a decision that would ever be particularly ironclad. And ultimately, everyone's vote comes down to, I've tried to look at what I can, and I feel this way about it.
Yeah.
And so then when I say something that doesn't agree with what you're saying, it's an attack not necessarily on your logic or on your research skills or anything like that. It's an attack on how you feel. It's like you being like, I feel sad today. And then me saying, well, you're wrong.
Yeah, cheer up,
Don't
idiot.
be a bitch.
Or the alternative, hey, I feel awesome today. And someone comes in and goes, no, it sucks today. It rained.
Sucks today.
My car stalled this morning.
Right.
Right. It's this amazing emotional battle.
So I've appreciated that your tone has been like, so part of the conversation we've been having and we've been flailing around, I think, is how do you come to a constructive, like how do you come to any kind of moral at the end of a conversation about how you should proceed through political discussions? And I guess what it kind of gets to is like, you have to treat it like an emotional conversation, right? It's like you need to look to how they tell you to behave in group therapy. Like if you want to try to have conversations about this stuff, because like your approach about positivity never takes it to that place where I feel like the vast majority of political discourse is right now, which is just like, yeah, well, you suck. And the other person says, yeah, well, but you suck and your ideas are bad. More. You have to start every conversation from the assumption that they believe everything they're saying and that they hold that belief with a passion that will hurt them personally and like physically if you take it away from them. Right. And then how can you respond in that way? Right. Like punching them repeatedly is not helpful. So
I tried to elicit a response. Well, first of all, let me say, so back to that post that I put about, hey, I'm voting for Hillary Clinton, roughly, this is why, et cetera, et cetera. I was trying, I had purpose with it, and I didn't tell anyone in it to vote for Hillary Clinton. I decided my purpose was to share my perspective. And I said specifically, I'm hoping that knowing my vote will help you vote. And I was hoping that my character and people's experiences and knowledge with me, if someone was on the fence, I was hoping they would vote for Hillary Clinton because of my post. And so I basically said that. I didn't say quite that directly, but so I had a lot of intention. And one of my other intentions was I was hoping that people who disagreed with Hillary Clinton as my vote, who wanted to vote for Donald Trump, would offer up a positive response about their vote. And what I discovered is that pretty much no one anywhere offered up anything positive about their decisions on either side. People just immediately got into they would call it debate, but it was really just asking a question that wasn't, that you knew the other person couldn't really answer, or asking a question then just ignoring the answer.
And for what it's worth, I engaged in the conversation in the thread of those comments, and I tried really hard to be inspired by your post originally in terms of not attacking what anyone else would say, but responding with, well, but here's the, I was trying to have a legitimate debate where you just sort of talk about policy, and really nobody was having it. There was one place where I specifically sort of attacked an argument, but it was partially because it was such a comical response, I thought.
I found that that post to be a really powerful experience for me, because again, I don't usually post stuff like that. I do love talking about controversial topics with people, but in the heat of that moment and that week, right before the election, I was lost trying to figure out what is the purpose behind these things. What is even the point of us discussing policy? Because you don't really have a choice. There are two people here, and each of them have thousands of perspectives on thousands of important things. And you don't really get to pick based on those perspectives. You just have this person or this person. And so I think a lot of the angst that this is my biased opinion on what I've started to discover. I think a lot of the angst that's existing is misplaced between people. I'm not upset at a friend of mine for wanting to vote for Donald Trump or for voting for Donald Trump. I'm upset that I don't really feel like anything either of us is doing in this area, in like a political election, is really accomplishing much. And so it's a frustration both with myself for not having more power in something that I'm told constantly is so important. You must get out and vote, which I believe on many levels it is. But then I started to feel a lot of self-doubt and self-loathing for not being involved in more ways in things that I care about. My fiance and I we watched a bunch of documentaries that week, which we always do, but with a different passion than usual. And I think the election draws something out in us that is underlying at all times, and we don't really get to address. And then every 4 years, it kind of comes up and we get really pissed off, and then we realize we can't do anything, and then we digress again.
Well, so let's chase this. It's just a frustrating scenario to have created, like in any context, it's like there's nowhere else in life other than political elections where what you're given is such a super sort of binary way of making a decision based on so much data. There's just nowhere else, right? It's like there are health decisions, and it's maybe like, here are the risks, here's what might happen. There are like financial decisions, but usually that list is like 10 to 20 items that you can kind of break down and process and whatever, right?
Like buying a car is very complicated and potentially very dangerous.
Right. And there's a gradient of outcomes,
but there are thousands of cars to pick
inputs. From. But there's thousands of cars, and there's thousands of other options. Motorcycles, there's mopeds, there's like, if you're trying to solve the problem of how do I get to work in the morning, a car is not even the furthest, right? So when we're trying to solve the more nebulous problem of who's gonna be this is the other reason that this conversation is stupid, because we're just electing the figurehead for a giant organization full of thousands of people, all that get to make decisions in this process, right? So it's it's frustrating because it's this hugely complex system with this weird binary choice we have to make at the end that we also know is sort of meaningless because it's sort of just a mass demonstration of preference. But the person is just the figurehead. I mean, they are the head of the executive branch. They do a lot of important things, but they don't actually make the laws. They're not supposed to actually be able to start wars. They need Congress's approval. They can threaten war, but Congress in the Constitution has the war power. Like, they have to vote to go to war.
They can lob a few grenades over the wall.
Yeah, there's a lot of questionable things, like, quote, police actions you can get away with unilaterally. But like full on declared war, and now the Geneva Convention applies to you differently.
So we've been struggling all morning. Let's just get outside the box. Who gives a shit about how the policy actually works right now and how our system actually works? We've got a bunch of things have been. I've been toying with this. Or I think we've reached a point where well, maybe not a point, but there will be a point. There are things happening where the structure of the United States government will be antiquated. It is a huge system. It's very arguably, I think, the largest like human-made business political entity on Earth, and we built it around a certain set of rules and regulations and ideals, and it will become outdated and it won't serve its purpose anymore at some point.
But take it back to that. So like, sorry to interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of government or democracy, right? Like the place to go a step further back from that is, what is government, right? Like what are laws? Like laws are just an agreement that here's a set of rules that were decided upon based on a system that we all also decided upon collectively. And because they ran through that system, we're going to trust that that's the best way to be, to the point that in a lot of cases, we're assenting to being locked up if we don't follow those rules. And essential in that whole process is communication. You have to talk to one another to get to the existence of this rule set, the existence of this entity that's going to govern this giant corporation, like you said, that is the government, right? And so what we've gone through and what we talk about so much in the podcast is this fundamental shift in the ability to communicate. And so when you say like the government is antiquated, there are places where that is very real. Like they're still using folders in pieces of paper, in manila folders, in file cabinets to store things, right? And we say it here to the people that are listening to this podcast, and it's like, God, that's so antiquated. But also, like, you got to take it a step further back, like I'm always trying to push here, which is what it could be the idea of how we vote is full on antiquated. Like, how do you handle the decisions in this complicated system that we just talked about in a world where kind of everybody could weigh in if they're willing to do it via text message?
And also, how do you decide what is appropriate for like a region that is governed, and how does that split up? The United States was this really interesting, I mean, I'm certainly not a historian on this stuff, but the United States was this interesting experiment in, hey, we've got these 13 colonies, and they all are made up of people who wanted to break away from some other political establishment that was suppressing them, and they've kind of organically formed based on their economies and their the ecology of the area that they're in, and by their religion.
They all have a different way of life based on their geography, essentially, right? It's like you live in the hills and your life is different.
Just the geography defined that.
It's like I have moved from one city to another in different climates, and your life is different if you have winter and it gets
wildly different,
icy,
wildly different.
And the sun goes away for 6 months out of the year. Like, life is different for you.
Let's just say it's easy to be happy every day in Southern California.
Yeah, it really is.
It's really easy to wake up and meditate in the morning. I didn't
realize until I left. But
so the United States took these different groups and said, "Hey, we're not going to just make you do. We gotta fight back against this organization that wants us back in it. Let's form an allegiance here, but let's keep power separated out into the states, right? Let's keep these regions separate. Let's keep your cities separate." And so you've got this breakdown. You've got this hierarchical web that is the United States. Now you've got 50 states, and you've got these things these political ideals that people argue about: states' rights, government's rights, the balance of power. How big should the federal government be? How many regulations should you have? Leave me alone. Smaller government, more taxes, less taxes. There's not like a right or wrong with those things. There's just are we doing good? Is the person who voted for it being helped? Are they being hurt? Are more of the people being helped or hurt? And then what percentage of those people should weigh in on certain things? Like, if you really look at a lot of regulations, maybe we should weight your vote on certain things based on your propensity to use that thing. Like, there's all this stuff that comes into play now that people are just aware of more, and people are aware of statistics, which I think is a real concept that people didn't used to like think about all the time. And now everyone can kind of look at the situation and be like, well, this is just dumb. It's dumb what we're doing. And I'm pissed off about it.
Well-
And I'm pissed that because your person's not going to fix it. And so fuck your person.
Well,
I
right.
feel
And,
dumb
and I
and
think that
uninformed.
goes back to that same problem of here's this thing of complexity. And then here's this thing of like, what I think is so cool about it, having spent a year, like the extent of my authority on this is taking it when you take constitutional law, that a significant component is understanding the constitutional context of how we got where we are now versus where we started from this like 2-page document of basic rules. And so the whole idea, and I think this is part of what makes it work, was about states' rights. And states' rights is it's a term you hear usually Republicans these days throw around a lot. But the whole idea was your way of life, if you're in Nebraska, is very different from Southern California. And you just are going to need different things. And so you should decide what those things are. And there's certain things that were meant to be assigned to. And so this gets to my thing where if you were to challenge me to say something good about Donald Trump, like I do frequently think that there's something to the argument for states' rights in the sense of, I don't know what people over in that state need. So yeah, figure out your tax policies, figure out your agriculture policies. I have no idea what you need for your corn-based agricultural economy.
Corn-based syrup.
But yeah.
That was a pretty weak positive thing about Trump. I don't think you even used his name or referenced anything about him.
Well, I don't think he's a nice person. So I can't, it's not really,
Don't go negative.
that's what you're looking for.
Tell me something positive about Donald Trump. And it can be anything.
He was giving,
It doesn't need to be political.
so he gave an interview on 60 Minutes and they asked him about abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And the specific question, I think, was, what would you say to someone who lives in a state where abortion is now illegal, who needs to get an abortion? And he said, I would say go to another state. And this isn't necessarily answering your positive question, but it kicks off where I think like the place to go with this is, I don't think that's a wrong answer based on what the structure of our government is supposed to be. Now, we could either assent to that structure being antiquated.
You're a good politician right now.
What?
You're a good politician right now.
We could either assent to that structure being antiquated, or we could go, actually, that really works. And if you really believe so strongly that that's the state of how it should be with abortion, then okay, go over here. But part of the problem is we're having arguments about things that get to that place of feeling that you were talking about. Like, there is no answer to is it right or wrong. The answer is, this is how I feel about abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of the state system is supposed to be, okay, if that's how you feel, there's a place for you to live. And by that, we are united and free, right? Like, and that sounds conceptually like a great argument until you look at the practical case, which is somebody having to drive 300 miles to get a medical procedure. Regardless of economic standing, that's a hardship.
Right. And they might run into a new problem. They might cross the state border and get pulled over because their car pollutes too much. And so there's no ideal location for anyone to go to where everything they want is going to be the way they want it. So we kind of, the whole concept of freedom is sort of flawed at a fundamental level. You can't really have anything going on if you want freedom. And now we've mixed in freedom with the right to clean water and the right to roads and the right to health care and the right to vote and the right to get Twinkies at the convenience store down the street.
It's back to like stuff we talked about in our very first podcast, right? Like, if you follow the transition of, we need to design a thing to carry water with us so that we're not constrained by having to live by this body of water all the time. Now we want that thing to work better. Now we want the water to come to us. Now the water has gotten to us with such certainty that we want to treat it like a right. Mm-hmm. And so it's not acceptable to people to drive into another state and find out they don't have the right to water. They have to go to a depot. They have to pay a lot of money for it. They can't afford this thing that's going to keep them alive because of the policies of that state, right? And if we're all going to live in a system, like I was saying before about this nebulous idea of government as a giant system of cooperation, if you have a gap that wide, cooperation breaks. And it's how you end up with civil wars. Because when somebody says to you, you can't have slaves anymore because that's morally reprehensible, and you're standing there going, our whole economy is based on slaves. As far as we can see it, if you take our slaves away, our way of life goes away. Like, that's how you have a civil war, right? Like, you're talking about a gulf that wide. And so
one of the things that I've been toying with is like a conceptual model here is that the the idea of debating policy is not really useful all the time. It has to be what gets done. It has to be the day job of the politician, of the mayor, of the governor, of the president. They have to enact policy. They have to make decisions to get roads built and to get clean water and to come up with a healthcare system. But what people really care about, and what I think the politicians really care about, I mean, I like to take the assumption that people who work in government are there because they care about stuff. They care about people. They care about making the world better. And so the debate, a presidential election should be about a moral code. It shouldn't exactly be, or maybe it shouldn't initially be about how you're going to enact that how you're going to support that moral code. I think there should be more debate over how should we be as people. It shouldn't be, what are you going to do about immigration? It should be, what are your thoughts on human life? Where should people be allowed to live? What is guaranteed to you as a human? Let's start at the Constitution and start with the sentences that begin the Constitution. How do you guys feel about these?
All men are
and then
created
expand
equal, that part?
Yeah. Shouldn't we have a code that is evolving as a country? The moral code of the United States should be something that exists and evolves through time as different people and different groups move through power. What if because they're these concepts that I think that we could get people to agree on. Wouldn't it be great if everyone were healthy all the time? Stop thinking about policy or how to enact that. Would you agree that if you could, would you let everyone on earth be healthy all the time?
Yes.
Right? It would be really hard to get most people to say yes to that if you're in a debate context, because they assume you're going somewhere where you're going to like trick them. You've got some logical fallacy. You're going to pull out some legal trick and throw them in jail. But conceptually, I think everybody wants everyone else to be healthy and happy and feel good. And so if that becomes our debate and then the policy sits on top of it, it takes it away from, well, your fiscal policy is stupid because of these 47 studies that have been done over the last 50 years. And mine's awesome because these 13 economic professors from Harvard support it. That's an awfully difficult discussion to have between people if you haven't already agreed on some underlying goal together. How can you even discuss policy if you don't agree on an underlying goal? Like, your policy is meaningless. If you don't think everyone should be healthy, then we can't even begin to talk about healthcare. What's the fucking point? You don't want people to be healthy. So the whole discussion is a waste of time. And so we need to get to a deeper core here.
Well, it doesn't need to be
static.
The problem, though, is the extrapolation in the conversation, right? I think it's worth talking about here more broadly. Like, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to pick apart, I think, is, like, if we had to name the episode, I feel like it would now, at this point, be on political discourse or something, right? It's like, you're talking about how do you talk about these super complicated things, right? And your idea that it comes down to, well, is human life valuable or not? Let's go with healthcare, right? Because abortion's too late. Healthcare. Should everyone get to be healthy as a right? It's an easy thing to say yes to, but then if I tack on, what if it makes your life a bit more uncomfortable? And you start to lose some people that are like, well, actually, because that's what you're talking about with universal health care. Everybody's going to lose a little bit of income in exchange for everyone gets to have a guaranteed standard of healthcare access. And when I say the supposition of like moral behavior this also is tied up in the whole conversation, because if somebody, like if you extrapolate from the fact of somebody's against universal health care and their argument against it is I pay too much under this system, you can't chase that all the way to the place of then you must not care about human life and the idea that everyone should be healthy, right? Like, because that's probably not where they're going with it. And to chase it there is not constructive. And I do it all the time. And then I'm like, oh, too bad this friend of mine turned out to be a piece of shit. And that's not a fair place to go with it. And it's not constructive. Even if all I'm chasing is for my well-being, it's not constructive to go to that place because I don't think it's a valid extrapolation.
Well, what could be constructive there is to not use that moral code as leverage to argue with someone, but to use it as a safe place to go back to. Hey, whoa, we've gotten really heated here. Let's go back and look at our moral code. We all agree that we want people to be healthy. We all agree that it's the right in our current society, in our current time, with the technologies we have and the infrastructure we have. We agreed that it would be really great if everyone could be healthy all the time. So let's keep proceeding. Let's remember that.
Right.
Let's hug over that concept, right?
I think the way that you chase that to begin with, and I guess this is where I'm going with it in the same vein, is if you employ positivity, you can't go to that place of this person is just morally bankrupt, right? Like if you only are going to go, okay, so like that's why I think we start from that question of what's a positive thing about Donald Trump, right? Like the reason I haven't been able to provide one really is because I think you gave the answer that I would give, right? Like
the easy one,
the positive answer. Yeah, but it is also, I mean, it is a valid perspective, which is maybe the system is complex enough and tied up enough with economics and global markets and things like that, that like you should have a business background to run the country. Mm-hmm.
I'm concerned that we've spent too much time talking about Donald Trump in a positive light. I don't want that to send the wrong message.
No, what I was trying to say was more like you have to understand that the person that you're talking to on the other side of how you think stuff should be, they're not there just to beat you. They're there because that's what they feel is right.
Right. There shouldn't be a win-lose mindset.
And how do you cut a win-lose mindset out of a system that I just described, which is so massive and ridiculous? But in the end, there's this binary decision.
You stop being so fucking negative about everything.
You could also make it not a binary system.
Yeah, that is kind of the rule. I mean, we come down. This comes down to like basic group collaboration. Somebody's got to ultimately make a decision. Didn't our system used to take the loser and make them VP?
Yeah, actually.
That seems like a great thing to do, right? Half of the country wants this thing to happen. Half the other half wants this thing to happen. Let's make them work together.
I don't know why that went away, right? But that's the idea of the Swedish system. You end up with an odd number of delegates, and each one represents the top, because they have like 13 political parties. And so the top 3 get to run the country. But it means that they all have opposing views and feelings about how this thing should be, and they have to hash it out at the top before an executive decision gets made on anything.
This is where I was starting to go with a comment earlier, and we kind of went somewhere else with it, but the United States is a huge institution, the U.S. federal government, the country as a whole, its economy, its states, etc. And its system just isn't going to work well forever. And so I don't see how we could really change these things. I have a list of interesting policy, fundamental changes to the U.S. government that could be made, but they'll never get made. We'll never change fundamental foundational aspects of how people get elected. And so the world is ready for a new system to come into play. And you can only see that where an old system has failed or an old system has gone away. And I think a positive view on what the world stage tries to do in countries that are in bad shape is they try to go in and set up something that's better than what we had before. The United States is this brand new system of government that was established a few hundred years ago and totally blew everyone's mind. And everyone's like, shit, we've been living in this shitty state where everyone's a king and they're like royalty and maybe they're
People have to carry their
part
provenance around. I think that was in another
fuck
chunk
their
of it.
provenance. I'm going to go live in this place where we elect someone to lead. That swept the planet.
Right.
And a lot of the world lives in that now, in that conceptual sort of democratic, pseudo-democratic government. And it's looked at as like the future for people and a better place to be. But it's far from perfect, and it's not going to be the system that's here in 1,000 years. It might not be the system that's here in 50 years.
What's interesting is, I think, and I like, I've certainly not made vast study of, the feelings of the founding fathers exactly. But going from what was written in the documents that we still use to run our country, like, they were very aware. They had just gone through a bloody rebellion and revolution of a form of government. And they were very aware that that's a thing that needs to happen. Like, and I don't mean, it's not that place of like, we should get guns in the streets, but the idea that governments change, like when people present as an argument that the Constitution is this ironclad, like, not meant to be changed document, usually the argument that I present is, never mind what you want to point to say that it should stay the same. Like, imagine where your head would be if you had just finished a war against a vast empire and won, and now you got to decide what to do next. Like, your awareness of the need to do that would probably be pretty high, right? Like, so like, it's just me trying, like, I'm just trying to reframe this idea of like, there's no possible way that they thought what they were writing down were the laws for how it was to be forever. And they talked about it a bunch in letters back and forth that I've read about how, like, Jefferson thought they were going to have a bloody rebellion on the scale that they had just had, like, once a generation. Like every 50 years, he thought we were going to have a full-on revolutionary war.
Maybe we need that.
That's part of what I'm
right?
afraid of when we seem so divided.
If there is no civilization in history that hasn't had that, except for current ones that haven't had one yet.
Right.
So it's kind of an inevitable state. That's not a very positive view, and that's not. It's great to think about the United States and other Western governments as this amazing progressive accomplishment that will take us into outer space on spaceships to travel the universe and spread the good word. But that's just not what history tells us is going to happen. And so I think back to your original point about you come into the presidency looking young and excited. You just became the most powerful person in the world, and you get to make the world a better place how you see fit. Everyone has got to be stoked as shit that that's happening. And then you come out of it looking like a zombie ate the bottom half of your body and ripped your heart out. And I think your second situation is what's the truth. You go in and learn everything, and you realize how precariously balanced the world is. There's so much going on. I don't mean to say that there's this always pending apocalyptic event that's going to throw us into zombies chasing us in the street, but most big things could fall apart really quickly if anything goes wrong. The fact that a person can back their truck up into a power center and take out power in half the United States speaks to that. The fact that a solar flare can take out our satellites and all communication is going to shut down, that speaks to that. These are big, bad things can happen, and we're constantly teetering. And so my argument is, wouldn't you rather be hugging each other when that happens so we can start from a place of positivity and cooperation Would you rather be fucking hating each other so you kill the other half of the population as soon as you get the chance?
Well, it sure seems like the phenomenon of the filter bubble it happens because people would prefer the first one. Like people want to be hugging and happy and cooperative and baby pictures and puppies and Joe Biden Obama memes. Like
Certainly seem to on a small scale, right?
and so maybe the states work because the small scale is supposed to be where it's levered, and it's like once every 4 years we have to come out and we have to have this conversation, and it gets nasty. What's interesting to me in the conversation there is the idea of, okay, people would prefer to live in that filter bubble and be happy and cooperative and all that kind of stuff. But we increasingly, if you follow this graph, have been having elections that are more and more about a response to discontent with the state of the system, right? Like Obama's first campaign was all about change and hope. And to be honest, Donald Trump ran on exactly the same thing. It was a more negative, caustic version, but the message was the same. I'm going to change the system. So that's 2 elections, 8 years apart, where what was voted for was we need a new system. Like, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, so the hopeful
Is that
part
always
of me,
what's voted on?
the hopeful part of me is it's just like a pendulum thing. It's going to swing back and forth till it lands kind of in the middle, and then everyone will get to live in the happiness that they exist. Just the scary part is if it keeps flying one direction or the other, right? Because like on the liberal side, I'm seeing scary stuff happen. Like some of the I understand the pushback against the safe space idea, because if you enter a safe space and you're not welcome there, you are assaulted as if segregation is happening. So I'm buoyed by the hope of what you were just saying, that positivity is what people choose without the constraints of trying to make decisions about a system more complex than anyone could possibly understand. Everyone chooses happiness and hope and prosperity and all these other things. So how do you bridge the gap between the two? I think that's where it comes to political discourse, right? Like,
so I think it's important to have perspective on. It's important to have a broader time frame perspective on the things that we're arguing about, and I think it's just really, really important that we stop demeaning each other. The winners should not spite the losers, and the losers should not hate the winners. And that concept needs to go away. That's what has existed for 8 years in one direction, and it just swapped, and it immediately went the other direction. All my friends who I think of as really smart and passionate, who've posted these like pretty left-leaning liberal things, have immediately switched to being angry and hateful. And they don't mean to be, and I didn't even recognize how far they were in the other direction under the other rule. And now I'm like, oh my God, what just happened? We have been exactly the same as the other side. Other, against. And that is why I've felt so disillusioned after this election, because everyone just fucking hates each other. But it's only about this one area. It's not regular life. And in 3 weeks, we're going to go back to people posting selfies of their newborn babies and their families and their friends and their parties and their holiday parties with their friends who voted for Donald Trump and voted for Hillary Clinton and voted for a third party. And people are going to be loving each other and hugging. And so we need to carry that over if we want to exist in the current form of our country and government. Where's the love, man?
if you could find, like, how do you find a way to be proactive in your life or in local politics or just wherever you need to direct it, to put that idea of it, you bear the baggage. It's like a mindfulness thing, I guess, right? It's like being mindful of your bias and your baggage and your feelings and all that kind of stuff. And then trying to still counter that with positivity when you encounter somebody else where you want to talk about this sort of political thing. And then what do you do when their response is not constructive or negative? I don't know that I have answers for that, but I sort of feel like this is the thing we're both chasing here, right?
You give them a hug. You just hug them and you hold them until they start to cry, and then you cry, and then the credits roll.
Well, exactly. I was gonna say, oh, what a beautiful scene.
The happiness comment, despite being a very Southern California hippie, yogic attitude,
I'm gonna Declaration of Independence you. The second section, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like, this was a bunch of dudes sitting around going, okay, this government has got to start from the place of everyone is allowed to pursue this thing that we have decided is paramount above all else.
yeah,
Happiness
say pursuit
and
of
freedom
hate.
to do whatever the fuck you want. Right? And then, but then the rest of this document says, except you can't always do whatever you want because you don't want to impinge on other people's happiness. And then
it gets complicated.
and that's the grounds of the whole system, though. So, like, when you talk about we need a new system, or the weight politically seems to be going in the direction of increasing discontent with the state of our system, like, I think what Trump got elected on is this idea that, okay, we tried the guy who fits in with the standard establishment and says he's going to change everything. And we weren't happy as a populace with how that went. So now we're going to install the guy who's saying, okay, what we got to do is burn the system down. And that's scary because it's really risky to burn the system down to try to fix it. It's just as a message.
Right. It is. It's a scary way to come at it, but maybe that's necessary.
And so it's that thing like, but how do you get back to that message of everyone is just chasing happiness, right? It's like the person who wants universal health care wants it because they want to not worry about the shit that's making them sick so they can be happy. The people that don't want universal health care, it's generally because they don't want their payments to go up because they think that having that money is what makes them happy. And I don't mean to present that as if I don't agree with that. I just, like, that's the perspective that is presented on that side of that argument, right? It's like, how do you help unify everyone in an understanding that, like, they just are voting for the thing that they think is going to make them happy? And so how do you help with that conversation when you think they're misguided? And it's like, that's what takes it to this place of it gets philosophical and like religious, because that's what religion is supposed to be about too. Mm-hmm. Here's how you lead a good life that makes everyone around you happy. Yeah.
The religions start with moral codes.
Like, so it's all that, it gets into like, you can spend a lifetime thinking about the philosophical debates around like what is happiness even.
So let's be a little more realistic here as we kind of come to the end of this episode. It's great to say be happy all the time. I think it would be fabulous if, instead of people on Facebook railing on how much they hate the other candidate, if they had instead spent their time talking about the positive aspects of the candidate that they were supporting. That would have been very helpful. That would actually help me understand what another person sees from their perspective and what I could base things on. If you just tell me how dumb I am and how dumb my perspective is and how dumb the person I'm supporting is, you can't get anywhere. I can't learn or grow from that. I can only get upset or frustrated, or at best, not get upset and frustrated and still not learn anything. But at the same time, we've got to be realistic that when you believe that someone's going to do something horrible, you have to speak up. And I think genuinely a lot of people that voted for Donald Trump thought that Hillary Clinton was going to continue to do some horrible things. And I think that's fair. And I want to be very clear that I am afraid that Donald Trump and the people that he's surrounding himself with are going to do some horrible things themselves. And so it would have been very helpful. And I said this explicitly to people. Can you tell me what you see that gives you hope and makes you excited and makes you proud to vote for the person that you're voting for. Maybe not even proud. That's not necessarily fair. If you hate both candidates, you can't be proud that you're voting for one of them. But what is it that you're going for? What are you hoping to accomplish? What are we hoping to accomplish? And what are we supposed to do right now?
Right.
And how do we handle things when doom is on the horizon, right? You can't just be positive all the time. If something horrible is going to happen, you got to speak up. I believe that thoroughly. There are a lot of famous quotes talking about that. The way in which Donald Trump ran his campaign to get elected, and without judging any of his policies or any of his perspectives or any of his plans as president, I can factually say that he spent a lot of his time talking negatively, at least negative spin on a lot of the things that he said. And he used that emotion to appeal to people. And in doing so, I don't know where I sit on this conceptually, but I have deep, dark thoughts sometimes. I have thoughts that I think are bad. I have thoughts that I know are bad. And I try not to act on them. And I'm not sure if I'm a bad person just because I have them. I like to think I'm not. But when you were kind of taught that acting on them is where you make them reality, and when they become bad, when they become damaging, and he chose to act on a lot of them. And that is damaging. That's releasing. It's making it okay for everyone to act on thoughts that I think a lot of people know are bad. And that's why you get a lot of defensiveness on both sides, too. And Hillary Clinton, whether or not she's just as corrupt, or excuse me, I don't mean to presuppose that anybody is corrupt without looking at particular facts, but maybe you believe that both of them are evil and corrupt and in the system and elites taking advantage to make themselves wealthy. But she didn't present things that way. She didn't tell you how awful other human beings are. She didn't tell you that people of different races are going to hurt you or rape you. She didn't incite violence in the same way. And
Yeah.
even as I'm saying this, I realize that that's just not how it was presented around the world. I think everyone on the other side feels, a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump feel the same way, that she was doing all those things. And that takes us back to our original conversation of what the fuck just happened with our news?
Right.
What the fuck just happened with our source of information?
Yeah.
And where do we go from here?
Well, and it's like, what do you do? I don't know. I feel like I'm a C again in terms of where this goes for. I don't
Maybe
think
this doesn't go anywhere.
I don't
Maybe
know
this
that
is like
there's an episode in
a
this,
sullen, depressing episode.
But yeah, it's like, I mean, that's fine too.
We always try to end with like a, hey, here's how to deal with selecting a energy efficient car.
Well,
Now that
here's
we have
how to
fucking
deal
clue
with
what
this
we're
one.
talking about,
Keep
but-
thinking. That's
where I am. I was unprepared to start this topic, even though I know it was like the appropriate one for us to tackle right now, because I don't know what I'm thinking about stuff still. I still don't know.
Yeah, I really don't know. Like, it's what I've been trying to pick apart, and I thought that is the place that we could go with it. And maybe this is the next podcast. Is like how in terms of the media that's put in front of us, in terms of our access to information and how we use it, why is this one such a big deal, right? Like, I was alive for George W. Bush getting elected, and I remember that people were not so happy about it, and it also came down to a contentious election where he didn't win the popular vote. But it didn't feel so apocalyptic. And I feel like the tone, certainly in Southern California right now, is very morose and apocalyptic. It's also a gloomy day, which doesn't usually happen here.
Bummer.
But
We need to elect a new governor, apparently.
because it's gloomy.
I promise more sun. Right.
I mean, I guess the part of the problem is the entirety of this, our conversation thus far and the messaging of the podcast has very much been like, here's cool technology stuff that is an answer to a problem you probably didn't know you have, but here's the interesting moral stuff that factors into solving that problem you didn't know that you had, right?
It's been light and easy.
I don't think there is an answer for how technology fixes this. Like it requires a fundamental shift in human behavior that I don't know that, like, I mean, the fundamental shift is happening in the form of how we communicate, right? But it's like a fundamental shift in perception that I don't like. We can't get through it in an hour of explaining to you how iPads work.
Well, it has to come down to a set of rules that are quantifiable and that we can measure outcomes. That's kind of what we do. That's kind of what like modern intellectual politics does. It says, well, let's look at this thing that's needed and let's try to kind of maximize its potential for the population. You know, we try to do good where it makes the biggest difference, and that doesn't always work out, and becomes obvious where that's skewed because of capitalistic endeavors and money, power. But the general idea is let's take this concept and put it into this equation and maximize the graph. And hey, we pick the policy that
Right.
optimizes for the outcome. Maybe 80% of people, maybe only 80% of people can be healthy. And then, okay, well, if 80% can be 100% healthy, do we want to make 90% of people 90% healthy? Where's that trade-off? It's these little subtleties.
Right. And that starts off with like a philosophical assumption right at the beginning, which is utilitarian. Mm-hmm. That the greatest good for the greatest number of people is the best thing. What if in that 90% is what if in that 10% of people that, you know, of that 10% is an untreated case of cancer that kills, you know, the guy that would have led us to world peace?
Or
right?
What if in that 10% is an entire race who happens to be genetically predisposed to that problem? And that exists. That those are real problems, right? So,
I guess like the thing that I always want to chase though is like, could we? Where does technology cut off? And you have to just think about it as a person. Like, are there tools we could build to help you with that analysis of the outcomes of certain things? And it's the problem. It doesn't matter because all we could ever feed you is statistics, and they're meaningless because of the reasons we've talked about in previous podcasts.
It all comes back to the idea of equality and fairness. That's like the underlying aspect of the universe that seems to be at play here. We've kind of all come to the conclusion that it would be great if we were all treated equally. And I know I think most people, it seems like most people believe that, even though maybe they act differently. Like they consciously kind of
self-evident,
right? They're like, people should be equal. I just don't like those people. And so there's a disconnect there that you can see sometimes. But I think generally people are like, yeah, that's a good rule. Let's treat people well. But the problem becomes then fairness. And that's just a constant equation that we're chasing that can't really ever be achieved. As we make things, we live in a country where very few people die from horrible diseases that used to kill most of the population before they became adults. We don't have things like polio or worms living in our stomachs like most of the human population used to a few hundred years ago. We have antibiotics, easy access, generally relatively easy access to hospitals. Even if you don't have health insurance, you can still go to the hospital, and generally most places will treat you.
You're not allowed to treat you. There's the law.
You have water. You can get around. Like there's a lot of stuff that's really, really good. And so now all of a sudden the granularity of what is awful and what is fairness is the granularity smaller, but we as humans are really good at adjusting our perspective and adjusting our place in the world and recognizing unfairness. And so I think
I think that's where the question gets to the system, which is the question of, does the system need to be replaced? Comes down to, if everyone is fundamentally questing for essentially, like on a quest for essentially the same thing, and then there are these ideas of fairness, and like if we want to treat it like a system that's going to flow toward that diffusion and fairness that we're always chasing on this podcast, is the structure of democracy now getting in the way of people's inclination to chase that diffusion?
Maybe.
Like, I don't know what you would stack up in its place, but the argument might be our form of representative democracy and separate states is antiquated, like you were saying earlier in this hour. Of like it like maybe that's the place that our system is broken, which is everyone is questing toward a certain degree of this. Like, well, that's not fair that this happens and this happens, and our system and the system we have can't serve that. It's not hopeful because shit, replacing that system is not an easy fucking, it's not like boop, fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't
know.
Keep
I'm
thinking.
picturing the end of a serious Radiolab episode where they just kind of cut to silence.
They don't know what I know.
I once saw diplomacy defined as letting other people have your way.
My feathered cap of intelligence
I
didn't
need
work
the
there.
Inception sound right now. Just whoa. Resistance is futile.
Sure fucking is.